says guest, not guests. I don't know if you care about that.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to SF Commons. Tonight we have a very special show. We are going to talk about what we have been seeing in the news lately. The anti-BDS legislation that is now moving through both houses of Congress, both in the House of Representatives and the Senate. We have Stephen Jaffe, who is a civil rights lawyer, who is also running for Congress. And we have Mr. Jim Haber, a member of the Jewish Voice for Peace in the Bay Area. It's important that we look at this issue because it has a direct bearing on our freedom of speech, on our civil rights. What are we talking about here? In the Senate side, we have the SB 720. And in the House of Representatives side, we have HR 1697. Both of them are very similar in context. Both of them amends the Export Administration Act of 1979, with some of you who like to do some research further, and the Export-Import Bank Act of 1945. The bottom line is, with this legislation, is that it criminalizes the support for boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning against Israel for what they are doing with the Palestinian people. That's the low end of that. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk to Mr. Jim Haber and Stephen Jaffe. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Myrna.
Okay, let's talk about this two legislation, and don't jump at the chance, the two of you, whoever. Talk to us about this legislation, what they do for the average person, and why it's very important for everybody to know about this. Yes, Stephen.
Both of these bills, I believe, came to be introduced by people in the Congress who essentially wish to pick your verb, cater to or pander to Jewish constituents. Senator Schumer certainly has many of those. I know some other people sponsoring them.
And he's majority leader
Yes.
in the Senate.
Yes, that's correct. They both are not identical, but they both technically really are themed the same. You are correct. It criminalizes certain kinds of activities. Because they purport or pretend to deal with financial issues, the export-import bill and the bank bill, I think the specific thing they do, if I remember reading it correctly, is criminalizing certain kinds of financial trades or transactions which violate with Israel.
Right.
And the basis for that is that Israel is identified as a nation state which engages in conduct which the United States, as a matter of policy, wishes to disapprove of and prevent.
Right.
And that's why these bills are used. In my opinion, and I'm speaking for myself only and as a lawyer with 46 years of civil rights experience, I think the bill is patently and transparently unconstitutional. It is clearly a infringement of the right of free speech, which has been upheld twice by the U.S. Supreme Court, as we discussed before we began.
Right.
And it is essentially a thought crime. What does it mean to support BDS? Are we going to imprison people for their political views on what the policy of the United States ought to be or not be? So I think that is wrong. My own personal view, getting away from the legal analysis, is that this bill identifies Israel as doing things not because Israel is the only person doing them, but there are other nation states which bother me personally as well. The first one that comes to mind is Saudi Arabia, which cuts off the hands and limbs of its citizens and treats its citizens very badly. And I don't see a bill criminalizing trading with Saudi Arabia. In fact, President Trump just came from Saudi Arabia and sold them over $500 billion, with a T,
Right.
dollars of armaments. So I think there's something, for me personally, there's something a little disingenuous about the BDS bill. That being said, I absolutely strongly support anyone's right to believe in the concept of BDS, of boycotting Israel, if they truly feel that is something in their heart they want to do, and I will defend their right to do that.
Right. Just in context, I was talking earlier to both Jim and Stephen regarding the NAACP versus the city of Claiborne. Just a backdrop, and that's why it's important that the public knows that there is a legal precedent that is going to be violated or circumvented if Congress is successful in passing this legislation. In 1966, the NAACP boycotted white establishments who they deemed being racist or committing racist acts towards them. These white establishments, like a hardware store, then sued the NAACP, stating that their activities are impeding on the business of these white establishments. The litigation took 10 years, and then the Supreme Court of Mississippi sided with the white establishments. And then in 1982, I mean, mind you, we talk about 1966, and then in 1982, the U.S. Supreme Court said no. The boycott is a freedom of speech as long as it's a non-violent boycott, that a political belief is a freedom of speech, and therefore they overruled, the U.S. Supreme Court overruled the Mississippi Supreme Court's ruling. So that's in the books. That's what we have today. So this legislation circumvents that. So anyway, so that's just like a clarification. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's comforting that that ruling was 8-0
Exactly.
at the U.S. Supreme Court, but
Exactly.
that still doesn't secure it from a new court review. I just want to slow us down. BDS, we use acronyms: boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And these are different strategies being used for
Right.
that Palestinian civil society has taken up in earnest. And boycotts are really important, and I just want to not get lost in BDS. What is
Right.
BDS? So the boycotts and sanctions are more what's happening, or divestment rather, boycotts and divestments. So say the Presbyterian Church USA or the Sisters of Loretto trying to divest their holdings in companies. And so, of course, people want to withdraw from companies in North Carolina because of the transgender laws, or fossil fuels, or tobacco, or guns. And these are long-standing efforts, nonviolent efforts. But somehow when efforts are made that are nonviolent on behalf of Palestinians, somehow it gets turned around and they get called violent, even though they're not. So if Mahmoud Abbas goes to the UN and talks about something, Benjamin Netanyahu could say, well, that's violent, and it's just not. These bills are part of turning truth on its head, I think, and attacking the Palestinians
Let's talk about the
in ways that they're
Palestinian
being
situation.
attacked.
And I see a lot of clips from the alternate media about how the Palestinian people are being treated, and it's pretty ghastly.
Yes.
Yeah, talk about that. 'Cause
I was just in Palestine in May with the Center for Jewish Nonviolence on a delegation. I also went with them last year in July, helping create the Sumud, which means Steadfastness Freedom Camp, in the South Hebron Hills, working with Issa Amro, who is a human rights defender according to the European Union, and even the State Department is monitoring the trumped-up legal case in Israeli military courts against Issa Amro. And it was an honor to follow his lead as the Israeli army came in to break up the camp in the middle of the night, one night that was on Palestinian land. There's separate legal systems for Palestinians, especially in the occupied territories. It's actually a separate system. Palestinians are presumed guilty before the law, not presumed innocent as Israelis or internationals are. A Palestinian in the West Bank and anyone else doing the same thing would be processed in separate systems, prejudiced against the Palestinian, not against anyone else. And then in Gaza, of course, Israelis, friends, feel like Israel's at war with Gaza. And so anything that happens is okay. And it's just heartbreaking. What's happening to Gaza is unconscionable, it's inhumane, and it's not really defensible. It's not making Jewish Israelis safer. It's not making me safer as a Jew not in Israel. It's not making me safer. I feel like Islamophobia, attacks on Palestinians, attacks on people who stand up for Palestinians, under attack in Israel. Israel is trying to attack non-governmental organizations and international organizations and Palestinian organizations and Jewish organizations in solidarity with Palestinians. They're really coming after people who support boycotts, whether they're in Israel or not. Recently, Rabbi Alyssa Weiss and other people of other faiths going on a peace delegation were turned away. So these bills to criminalize protected speech are part of an ongoing effort to delegitimize Palestinians, to take a word that Israel says. I mean, I just don't see these as, these should be protected speech. These
exactly.
bills are really odious, and they're trying to chill, even though they say the motivation was the UN High Commission on Refugees has been biased against Israel. I certainly disagree with that, and that's not a good motivation for a law to limit our free speech.
And certainly that's not referred to anyway in this Export Administration Act and the Export-Import Act. There's no reference to the United Nations in this.
But in the S720 and in the things from 1979 and
Exactly.
1945, they're not mentioned at all.
So,
this is new. This is because
this is all like a
Israel doesn't
distraction.
like what the international community.
Exactly.
And I think Donald Trump doesn't like what the international community is doing. So, like, the European Union calls Issa Amro a human rights defender. European Union, the UN High Commission on Refugees said, well, products made in the illegal settlements should be boycotted. And they're not even saying boycott all of Israel. And yet it gets built up in this larger way, which is dishonest, meant to confuse, and meant to make people feel like they want to hem and haw when something should be clear. I think someone from outer space coming would say, well, yeah, of course you should boycott. If you boycott anybody, yeah, you should boycott Israel. But somehow people who would, I think, take that up in any other situation, be it South Africa, North Carolina, or somewhere else, when it comes to Israel and Palestine, they hesitate.
Well,
and I want people to look at that.
I mean, look
They
at
shouldn't
California.
hesitate.
I mean, this implicates several laws that are in the books right now at all levels. California has a boycott legislation against Darfur. Look at their contracts. You cannot do any contracts with Darfur. Well, if this passes, what does that mean? Are those illegal then? Well, because this is federal? Does this preempt
I think
the
it's,
state laws, right? I mean, all of these.
you're making an important point that
Exactly.
this is happening at all levels.
Exactly.
This isn't just happening at this federal level, which is really
Exactly.
important, but it's happening at the state level. Governor Cuomo in New York passed it as an executive order. A similar act in California was signed into law. There is a law in California that was signed by Governor Jerry Brown at the end of last year that is similar in intent to
Exactly,
this, and
yeah.
it is actually the law of California. Now, it hasn't been applied against businesses, so it says if a business somehow is shown to support a boycott against Israel for political reasons, then it shouldn't be able to get contracts with the state of
Exactly.
California. This is the law.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to focus on the federal case now when we've got state and local cases that need to be looked at by conscious citizens too.
Well, and also, I mean, bottom line, I mean, Stephen, I mean, this is a content-based regulation on a political belief. this goes to the very heart of what the First Amendment is supposed to stand for.
Yes.
I mean, it's not even content neutral. It's like content based. It's saying do not, protest non-violently against Israel, period.
Yes.
And Elizabeth Warren, of course, came out. She unsponsored. She sponsored it first. She's unsponsored it. And in her statement, she said that she doesn't support boycotts, divestment, and sanctions
Right.
against Israel, but she opposes this bill. I want people to support boycotts as a nonviolent effort for Palestinian liberation and to end the oppression.
Exactly. Well, the scary thing about this is I just read this article and I watched the interview of Judge Posner, right? He's one of those intellectual giants in the legal community. Every first year, second year law student, we read Posner's book, The Reinstatement of Torts, right? So he just said, look, the biggest corruption going on in America today is that Congress is owned by the rich. Now, from a judge, I mean, that's pretty revolutionary. And he goes, and our judicial system sucks. So anyway, I mean, so in layman terms, for the average person, Stephen, why would Congress do this? You want to be in Congress. What would be the first thing you would do?
Well, I wouldn't sponsor this, and I would come out forcefully against it, and I
Exactly.
would vote against it if I were asked to do so.
Right.
But the implications are far broader than just this bill. This is, as you very well said, this is criminalizing political thought.
Right.
Substantive political thought. And if a bill like this survives a constitutional test, which I strongly believe it will not,
Right.
but if it were to, this would chill every kind of political speech, not just
Exactly.
about boycotts, about what candidates you support, what party you want to belong to. Its implications are pretty much unlimited, and that's why I feel very strongly that I'm hopeful. My colleague here says I shouldn't make predictions, so I'm going to say
Not negative ones.
I
Anyway.
am hopeful. I am hopeful that this bill, even if it were to pass the Congress, and even if it were to be signed by President Trump, and I think he'd veto this, but even if it were to survive, all of that would be dead on arrival at the first federal courthouse
Yeah.
that it ever saw as being an infringement of First Amendment rights.
And the shocking thing about it is that when they're talking about bipartisan across the aisles, I mean, this is pretty horrendous. The fact that the Democrats wants to portray themselves as, in favor of civil rights, and the Republicans are supposed to be so bad. But you got Chuck Schumer, majority leader, and then who is sponsoring the main sponsor of the SB 720 is a Democrat.
Well, the Democrats have been very pro-Israel for quite a while. And that's why it's been interesting over the years to see them lifted up as a champion for human rights. I think there's differences between the Democrats and the Republicans on this and other things, but they are beholden to the same masters of corporate wealth, and so that's hard. I think the shift in the Republican Party with the advent of Donald Trump is pulling everyone to the right. So like with this legislation, these incredible sentences, like a minimum fine of $250,000
Exactly.
if convicted. That's the minimum fine. That's the minimum sentence if someone's convicted under this.
How about 20 years
Now-
imprisonment?
Well, that's the max. But either way, we have to not let them get away with just reducing those numbers and say, well, it's been compromised. That's not okay. We need to oppose this full on. And if it's not because you support Palestinian and Palestinian solidarity boycotts, it's because you support free speech, I'll take it. Support free speech, oppose this, but don't just let them reduce the sentences and pass it as a compromise.
But yeah, because it doesn't matter what the sentence is. It's still making it illegal, right?
Yes.
So I need to throw something in here.
Okay, good. Let's do it. Yes.
Jim said the Democrats are beholden to corporatists. He's partly right. There are many Democrats like that. My opponent is like that.
Okay.
I am not. There is a progressive wing of the Democratic
that's
Party,
right.
which not only, and Bernie is the best example of that, not only is not beholden to corporations, will not take money from corporations. I will not take money from corporations. All of my donors are individuals, and some of them gave $1 or $27, very similar to the way Bernie. So I don't want to paint the whole Democratic Party as being a bunch of rich corporatists and establishment elitists, because
Party leadership, then.
Thank you.
They're all millionaires anyway. They're so wealthy.
And down a little ways from the
Yes,
leadership.
the present party leadership is the way, not the future.
May it be so.
Exactly, exactly. Well, there's there's hundreds of seats up for re-election or election.
Well, the entire House of Representatives is up for re-election every 2 years.
right. So 2018
So-
next year, how many seats
Yes,
are up?
435 seats in the House and 1/3 of the Senate.
Holy mackerel!
So,
we can change
which
things.
is 33 or 34 seats.
Right. So anyway, here I just found his name. Senator Cardin Benjamin is the main sponsor for the S720 Democrat. So there you go.
Yeah.
Any
Sad.
parting words, because we're running out of time as usual. Yeah, it goes so fast.
You want to go first?
Well, once again, the right to boycott is a civil right in the United States. Let me say that again. The right to boycott peacefully is a civil right in the United States, and anyone who wants to do it has a right to do it, and I will defend them. And I think that this bill is clearly in conflict and collides with that civil right, and that's why I don't think it's constitutional.
And I'd like to say that Palestine Legal and Jewish Voice for Peace and other organizations have created a good letter, a great analysis that's public online. So look up Palestine Legal and Jewish Voice for Peace, and you'll get a portal of good information, and look at what's going on in Israel and Gaza and Palestine.
And don't
Great.
forget to go to Jaffe, Jaffe, the number 4, and Congress.com to check out my campaign
Ladies
and my
gentlemen,
platform.
Thank you. Good night.